Okay, thank you very much.
All right. So, good morning once again, and good afternoon, good evening. So glad to have all of you on the call. I know we've got colleagues in Afghanistan and Bangladesh. For them, it is in the evening. And I know we've got also colleagues from Tanzania, from West Africa, from different parts of the world. So, welcome to this discussion. This webinar is basically focusing on the commitments that we have received so far under the Mutual Accountability Mechanism. And we will seek to tackle three main areas. Number one is just to get a better understanding of the processes that have been utilized to develop the commitments that we have received so far. And that will also give us the information about the nature of the commitments that we have, who has made these commitments, and what exactly do these commitments focus on. And then we also thought that we could utilize this time to discuss, or rather to share some information from the country briefs. These were documents which were prepared by different country teams ahead of the sector ministers meeting. These country briefs include a focus on the mutual on inequalities, but they also, to a great extent, cover the priorities that countries thought that they will be covering in the next few years. So we will do this double focus, so to say. The first one focusing mostly on the mutual accountability mechanism and the commitments that we have received so far, and then also looking at what could be done if your institution has not tabled commitments, and if you've already tabled commitments, what's next for you? And then the next part will tackle the aspect related to the country briefs. So we will get started with a brief introduction of these of the commitments. And at this point, I will just check if my colleagues Virginia and Balvant are on the call. Balvant, can you
I,
confirm you're on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
Okay, and Marisa, no, Virginia, you're there?
I am also here, Sitali, on Skype for Business.
Perfect. So can you take it up now?
Yes, would you like me to take over? Okay.
Yes.
Very happy to do so. For those who don't know me, my name is Virginia Rofe, and I am working particularly on the mutual accountability mechanism. And so I have been looking at all of the commitments that were provided by countries and by partners over the since the SMMs. I've been doing a lot of work on analyzing the commitments, and my purpose here is just to talk a little bit about how those commitments were developed, and then to talk about what kind of commitments we received, and then Balvant will talk about the country briefs. So how were the commitments developed? I think many of the people on the call were involved in some of these processes, but the commitments were developed through multi-stakeholder processes, in the main with the government taking the lead. So 47 governments made, the majority of those commitments were made through multi-stakeholder processes that included not only other government departments other than the water or the sanitation sector, but also in some cases health and other relevant parts of government, but also involving other partners, whether it's CSOs, whether it's private sector, or research and learning organizations, or indeed external support agencies. So that is how broadly commitments were developed. They were developed through national processes, through national platforms, looking at particularly the national plans that governments are leading on to identify what the priorities are for governments in working towards those national plans, which in turn take great note of the requirements of the SDGs, particularly, obviously, in this case, SDG 6.1, 6.2, and parts of 6.3. So the commitment was developed through national plans and were prioritized by governments, by the specific departments, in order to providing a platform at the national level for identifying what the priorities were, which then could be then brought to a global level, as was done at the sector ministers meeting. The countries in developing those commitments also obviously had various different resources to hand, including the collaborative behavior country profiles, which are developed through GLASS, and also using global reports such as JMP and GLASS to help priorities. Now, because the focus of the sector ministers meeting and indeed the 2019 high-level political forum and the all UN processes this year are looking at leave no one behind in particular, we were hoping that would be a particular focus for commitments, and I'll talk about that again in a little bit. I just want to also highlight, however, that JMP is working towards identifying how to provide data for countries, or working through the countries' statistics processes on leave no one behind. But because it's a very complex area, and because it's relatively new, I think that JMP will develop more skills in that area, which will also then help governments in the future. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Am I in control of the slides? No, I'm not. I will just talk very briefly about this. I think we might want to come back to this slide because Balwant wants to talk more about the country briefs. But the country briefs, which many, I think 42 of the countries, and they also mentioned that the different data sources that they used, which was including their national plans and their sector reports. As I say, I think we'll come back to this slide afterwards. Can we move on to the next slide, and then I think it's best if Balwant goes through this slide. I think he's more familiar with it. So let me just very briefly explain here who has made commitments. As I said, 47 countries made commitments and provided commitments prior to the sector ministers meeting. We're still receiving commitments, so I'm very pleased to say that number is actually now 48 countries have made commitments. And just to reflect very briefly, the sector ministers meeting provided a fantastic opportunity for countries to present commitments all at one time, but in recognition of the fact that the commitments and the mutual accountability mechanism is actually designed to be led by your own country's national processes. It could be that you are now planning a joint sector review or a national planning process, and after that you are more comfortable making commitments, or perhaps you want to revise your commitments. That's also that is recognized, and so these commitments that have come in prior to the sector ministers meeting, this will be constantly changing, and we'll be constantly updating this information on our website on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. So just to go back to that, so 47 countries made commitments. We now have 48. At the national level, private sector, we had 4 countries where there was private sector organizations or corporations also making commitments. Civil society, we had 15 organizations or networks, predominantly networks, making commitments in line with their national country commitments. We had 5 research and learning institutions at the national level making commitments. And here it looks like we've got a lot of external support agencies making commitments. Actually, that's predominantly UNICEF. So 47 countries made commitments. 47 UNICEF country offices made commitments in line with their country commitments. And there's also another one, which I think WSSCC in, I believe it was Nigeria or Mali, made a commitment at the national level. We also had the opportunity where global organizations, so organizations that work on the global level, were able to make commitments. In some cases, they made very kind of high-level commitments, and in others, they were more specifically relating to countries where they work. So we can go on to the next slide. So in terms of the country commitments, I'm just going to briefly go through the kind of priorities that were identified, or the themes that were identified in country commitments. Given that it was a meeting relating to leave no one behind, we can see that there were 9 commitments made on the elimination of inequalities. But if you reflect that open defecation free status, which was the focus of 22 commitments, is actually also very much about leave no one behind, we can see that that focus on eliminating inequalities was actually pretty strong. Sanitation was specifically mentioned by 29 countries and hygiene by 6 countries. So I think from this we can really see that the sanitation and water for all is very strongly identified in by the countries, the SWA countries. Those are all more the outcome end of the commitments that were made. The other commitments that were made were more about the process, and we can see there was an increase in financing by 11 countries, but particularly looking at new or innovative financing strategies and mechanisms for 14 countries. Development of WASH strategies and plans were made by 30 countries. 22 countries looked at improving monitoring and review processes. Capacity building and learning was made by 9 countries, and sector coordination by 17 countries. And I think you can see that all of those themes are very much issues that SWA focuses on through both its collaborative behaviors and also by the building blocks. Thank you. Next slide. So, in terms of the other constituencies and the commitments that were made by other constituencies, as I was saying, there were commitments made by research and learning in 4 countries, and that was looking at research on water resources availability, for example, in Mali, particularly looking at climate change. I won't go through all of these, and I know you'll be sent these slides, but the research and learning institutions were very much looking at areas that where their specialist area, they could strengthen their ability to support governments. And particularly if you look at Bhutan, we're also looking at partnerships and helping build improved skills and research. Next slide. Then we have the private sector. Sorry, this slide seems to have got a little bit mangled, but I hope you can also see this. The commitments made by private sector in 4 countries, but also, as with the research and learning, there was actually private sector was specifically mentioned by 7 country commitments, saying that they wanted to strengthen their ability to work with the private sector. In the interest of time, I'll move on to the next one. External support agencies, as I was saying, UNICEF made commitments in all of their, in many of the countries that submitted commitments. And they're also submitted specifically at the global level towards supporting regional processes such as AMCAO, Sakastan, Latinosan, so that they're really able to strengthen the regional processes to make sure that sector coordination is strengthened. If you look at the DFID, for example, they have an interesting commitment about making sure that all WASH services are disability inclusive. And WSSCC, for example, committed to supporting the work that is being done through country engagement plans using the SWA framework in all of the countries where they are working. I think it's in the 17 countries. Next slide, please. And then for the civil society, there were civil society organizations or networks in 15 countries making commitments, and commitments were made by 3 global level organizations. And here you can see in the table the kind of commitments that they were, the common themes that they were making, which is about accountability within civil society, coordination, collaboration, leadership, participation in national processes, budget tracking. So these are the kind of themes that civil society is particularly interested in supporting government in tackling. Next slide, please. Now, I think that in terms of what we can learn from the commitments, given that it was a very short time frame, given that it was a very rushed process for many countries, and it was the first time that countries were engaging with the mutual accountability mechanism, there were gaps in some of the commitments that were made. Most of the commitments, or many of the commitments, are very strong and build on processes that exist at the country level. But I think that there are some lessons that we can learn, and we will be providing some guidance on how countries countries and other partners can strengthen their commitments. And I just want to go very briefly through these issues, through these themes that we've identified that might help you when it comes to your own review of your commitments and setting new commitments. So it's critical. The first one is it's critical, I think, to set a time frame. Not all of the commitments that were made had a time frame, which means it's very difficult to decide how to monitor or measure the success of that commitment. So if you have made commitments, please do look back and check that you put a time frame on them. The second point is, as we said before, that the commitments need to be anchored in national development plans. Oh, and they should be SDG aligned. Sorry, that's a mistake in the slide. My fault. They must be SDG aligned, because ultimately we're heading for that 2030 target date. And so it's important to put a time frame in and to anchor them in the national development plans. Given that these are related to SWA processes and the SWA framework, it's critical that there are multi-stakeholder consultations and not just involving one government department that, without talking to other partners who will be supporting government in reaching the national development plans. Also critical, obviously, is to be realistic and not to be too ambitious, but to be just about ambitious enough, but without it being something that then is a fantasy. In some of the commitments, it wasn't entirely clear what was being committed to, and I think that's also a critical point, that the simpler the commitment is, and the simpler the language that is used, the clearer it is what it is that is being planned. And the last point is less, I guess, for country commitments. It's more for what other organizations, what other constituencies, what other stakeholders are able to commit to. They can only commit to, or you can only commit to, what your organization is responsible for or is willing to take on a role of doing. And I think in some cases we saw some of the development partners saying that they would support government to do whatever. But in fact, you need to be thinking more internally. What is it that your organization can contribute to achieving a commitment? I think that is that it? What's the next slide? Sorry. Ah, yes. If you want to table commitments, please do let us know. This provides the access to the form to fill in. We will be sharing this with you, but if you have any questions about it at all, please do contact the Secretariat. Next slide. handing over to you,
Okay.
Velvet.
Yes. Thank you so much, Virginia, for that. And welcome once again to those that have joined while Virginia was making the presentation. If you haven't yet put your name in the chat, please do so. And if you're joining with other people, please let us know. At this point, we would like to just pause before we get into the country briefs. If there is any question about the commitments and the presentation that Virginia has made, please either put it in the chat or just unmute your line, and then we will be able to hear your voice. So if there's any question, please feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sitali. Thanks, Virginia. My name is Nicholas from Nigeria, private sector. Virginia, I can see that from the private sector commitments, we have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 10 global commitments is not reflecting. And if I'm not also mistaken, I think we also have from 7 countries as well, instead of 4. Neil, I don't know whether Neil is out. He came in briefly and he just informed me on the statistics. That is on one side. On the other side is a question to Virginia. You said that most of the commitments should be national planning aligned instead of SDG aligned. But the national planning whatever, is it not also on how to achieve SDG? So if the national priorities are obviously geared around SDG, so why shouldn't the other commitment from other stakeholders be also around there? I think it's almost second to the last the last slide that you presented.
Yes, sorry, I'm sorry, Nick. So on the numbers of private sector commitments, I'm absolutely happy to update that. If I've made a mistake there, then let me update that. I think that's just what I have available in the Airtable. On the other comment on SDG aligned, absolutely, you're absolutely right. I got there's a mistake in the slide. All commitments, I think at this point we should be looking at being SDG aligned. There's just a mistake. There's a not where there should be not a not. I think the commitments are made from national plans, which are then obviously SDG aligned, and all partners should also be reflecting that in their commitments. So excuse me, I'm really sorry. There was a mistake in the slide. Before we send it out, we will make sure that's corrected.
Great. Thank you so much, Virginia. Nicholas, I hope that clarifies. And thank you for asking that question. I must say that it was really, really interesting to see the analysis of the private sector commitments and how they fit into the SWA framework. That was really interesting. So I will check if there is any. Nick, was that you? Sorry, somebody wanted to say something. Please go ahead.
Hello, Sitali. This is James from Liberia.
Yes, James. Good to have you. And I see that you have a team there with Assistant Minister Bolton and Timothy and possibly other colleagues. So welcome, and please go ahead.
It's actually going to do that. I was going to do the introduction. And we're also expecting the guys from the WASH Consortium, but they are not here yet. But we just got a call that they should be connecting remotely. Yeah, on the commitments, a few of the on the commitments for Liberia, government commitments, please, guys. Sorry. Okay. If you look at there were 4 commitments tabled, and one of those had to do with the allocation, the government allocation of funds to support the sector, and another one having to do with capacity building. As a sector, we have looked at that, and we think some of those are either ambitious or not really quite realistic. So we think we will review those commitments and then get back to SWA.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James, and really exciting to have you and the team there that you have in your office. And also, we are looking forward to have the consortium colleagues join remotely if they make it.
Yeah.
I will pass on the floor to Marisa, to Virginia and Marisa to deal with the specific components of your question. So, Marisa, Virginia, over to you. Virginia, do you want to pick it up?
Marisa, let Marisa start, and I will continue.
Marisa, are you there? Oh, okay. So I think we cannot get Marisa, but the reason we were asking Marisa is because she is the Secretariat point of contact for Liberia. So she deals with the nitty-gritties of the content there. However, at the overall picture, and Virginia, please do come in if you're ready already. But I was just going to say that yes, there will be an opportunity to revise the commitment and to resubmit that commitment using the form that we shared, and Virginia can go into the details. And it is in fact very important that we actually do this check of going through the commitment and seeing the extent to which each of those commitments are actually smart. Are they specific enough? Are they measurable? Are they realistic? And it seems as if you're going through that exercise to arrive at the conclusion that you're arriving at. The other thing to say is that with the SDGs, we also have to try to think through some of the major bottlenecks, the things that have actually held progress back. And in that regard, in some areas, we might need to be slightly more ambitious, but obviously not be unrealistic at the same time. So I think you're taking the right steps. And just to say that in terms of the platform that we have, yes, updated commitments can be submitted. And now, Virginia, I'm sure you must have additional points to make, or if you have any further clarifications, that would be great.
No, I don't think I have anything more specific to say, other than to say it's fantastic that you are looking at your commitments again.
I'm the only one getting the feeling that we may not be able to achieve. So I want to.
Sorry, shall I speak?
Yes, please.
So I think that it's a great opportunity always to look at them again, make sure that they are the commitments that you are making as a multi-stakeholder, as part of a multi-stakeholder process, to check that they are that you are going to be able to monitor them, and that they are SDG aligned and aligned with your country processes. If there's anything that we can do to help you, then please let us know. And any commitments that you make now, subsequently, we will receive we will add to the databases. The database is open 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always ready to receive new commitments, and we will update our website accordingly.
Great. Thank you so much, Virginia. And so let me check if there's any other question. And after that, we then will move to the next set of slides. Do we have any other questions? Dr. Massa, I see you've given us a number to reach you on. I will do that. We'll call you shortly. Do we have any other question? If there's anyone speaking, I cannot hear you. Just make sure that your mic is unmuted. Or if you start typing in the chat, I will then open your line immediately. No one is typing. No one is speaking. Okay, so we will move to the next set of slides. Now, these slides look back at the country briefs. These country briefs were summaries that countries prepared ahead of the sector ministers meeting. And my colleague Balvant has looked through all the country briefs that we received, and he will now share the summary that we see from these country briefs. Thank you. Balvant, over to you.
All right. Can you hear me, colleagues? At least
Yes,
one
we can hear
person. Okay. Well, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Balvant Godara, and I'm a part of the SWA Secretariat. I'm based in India, and I basically work on two things at the SWA. One is the country engagement. I'm sorry, and the other is the support to the research and learning constituency. So thank you for joining us. I see that there are lots of people today from across Asia and Africa. For those of you who have not done so yet, kindly write your names and organizations in the chat so that we can follow up better after the webinar. So I'm going to present to you a small section about an analysis of the country briefs. Now you will remember that many countries that participated in the SMM or planned to do so prepared country briefs, which were basically summaries of the summaries of the sector and its performance, as well as focus on inequalities. And then they also use these briefs to discuss priorities and commitments. And that is the reason that this section has its place in this webinar. So the briefs were made in order to inform and prepare the ministers for the SMM, of course. That was the most immediate aim. They were also suggested to promote multi-stakeholder collaboration and to lead to or to strengthen a common understanding of the situation in the country and the priorities. And after the SMM, these country briefs were conceived as important inputs to the country processes that are taking place. So on the diagram, you see the contributions. So how these briefs were made. Well, they were made through consultations between different stakeholders, analysis of policies, strategies, and plans. Many countries also spoke about their engagement in other international processes, such as the regional sanitation conferences. Then they also referred to sector analyses, which were national or international sector analyses, and sector coordination mechanisms. So all of these inputted into the country briefs. And the most immediate use was for the SMM, for the sector ministers meeting. But it is, as I said, these were designed and intended to serve a much larger purpose. And that is what you see on the right-hand side, on the right half of the figure. It's that they are intended to, one, to help identify and implement the follow-up to the SMM, and to better use the momentum that was generated and to keep that momentum going in the country. The second main contribution of the brief after the SMM would be that these briefs, they feed into the mutual accountability mechanism and would therefore help to refine, achieve, understand, and report on the commitments. Then they're also intended to go back and to contribute to the sector processes, the very sector processes from which they were taken, if I may, and so that they would then contribute to international and national processes. And since the SWA is also a platform for exchange of information and experiences, these will be disseminated. They've already been done so on the website, but also disseminated internally in countries so that they can help inform and inspire others. So this is the approximate place of the country briefs in everything that is related to the SWA. Now, if you go into the next slide, which Sitali has done, I think. No, the one before, yes, this one. So when these slides are made available to you, you will have access through hyperlinks to the 42 country briefs, and that were prepared and shared with us ahead of the SMM. And on the map, you see the countries that shared them. Of these countries, 7 could not finally make it to the SMM, but the briefs contributed to the dialogue on leaving no one behind, and should now be encouraged as an important resource for the sector. Many of the countries that prepared the briefs are not yet SWA partners, and so these briefs, they help the same process of understanding and dialogue around leaving behind. And it's noteworthy that 25 of these 42 countries had also country overviews before the 2017 outside. And that is again, these overviews are also accessible on the SWA website. Now, if we move on to the next slide, about three different. The next discuss three basic areas that the briefs focused on. One is, of course, inequalities, which was the overarching theme of the sector ministers meeting. The other is the commitments, which is most visible part, if I may, of the mutual accountability mechanism. The third area is financing, which has been identified as the major challenge in the sector in a large part of the countries. So on this slide, we see how the countries discuss. We see that out of the 42, 30 have actually, hold on, I'm sorry, I'll come back to that later. So inequalities are major challenge to the achievement of the SDGs related to the sector, to water, sanitation, hygiene, of course. And 1/3 of the brief that was shared with us said there is a poor understanding of inequalities. That is a challenge. And on the optimistic and positive side, half of the briefs that were shared say that they plan to strengthen the laws of policies in order to ensure a stronger legal framework for inequalities. Now, what was really interesting about this analysis was that many countries have put a significant understanding of the reasons for the inequalities. And on the first table, you see the most frequently cited reasons for the inequalities. And right on top is lack of quality data, which hampers planning in order to address inequalities. And the second most frequent reason cited for inequalities to even exist was the lack of financing and or the over-reliance on the donor resources, which are limited in any case, and which in many cases are not targeted to addressing inequalities. Now, at the same time, a lot of the country brief spoke about possible solutions, and that is what is given in the pie chart there. So 30 out of the 42 proposed at least one solution to address inequalities, and the most common solution proposed was to give more attention to inequalities in the country's laws, policies, and strategies. Similarly, funding, which was one of the major reasons for inequalities, has to be addressed. And the third and interesting solution proposed is to incorporate inequality considerations in the sector information system, which is directly related to the most prevalent reason for inequalities, which is the lack of quality data. So this is a snapshot of how country brief discussed inequalities. And on the next slide, we see, oh yes, it's quite a verbose slide, I'm sorry. But we see basically that a lot of the country briefs also discussed commitments, right? A big majority of them. And what is really interesting for as far as this webinar or the commitments are concerned is that these briefs give us a good understanding of the context from which the priorities and commitments are identified. So they tell us about where they're extracted from. They tell us about why, how they are situated within sector policies, for example, etc. So the briefs are interesting for that, to get a good understanding of the genesis, if I may, of the commitments. And a lot of the country briefs also speak about the mechanisms that they're going to use to follow up on the commitments. So now that the SMM is over and many countries have tabled their commitments, the briefs also give us ideas about how countries plan to follow up on those commitments. And I have a very clear example, it's the sector review which is taking place in Benin today and tomorrow. That review is going to be used to mainstream these commitments so that they can then be followed up by the entire sector. Now, one interesting thing is that open defecation has been identified as a major challenge, and many countries represent either targets or approaches to address open defecation. And there are also some countries which have presented priorities or commitments related to wash in institutions like schools and healthcare facilities. So now the main themes which are given in the table there will tell us about what the commitments are about. Many of them are, and this is in keeping with what Virginia presented about the main themes of the commitments. And we see also in the pie chart that a significant number, a big majority actually, present government commitments, and 15, so about 1/3 of the briefs also speak about partner. So this is a snapshot of how the country briefs are discussing commitments. And on the next slide, we see how country briefs discuss finance. Now, 2/3 of the countries have cited financing as the major challenge to the sector and to resolving inequalities. After citing the challenge, they've also presented an analysis of the specific challenges related to financing. So, not surprisingly, the most prevalent, the most common one is inadequate financing, especially from public sources. Then we mentioned before there is also over-reliance or insufficiency or lack of sustainability in donor aid. A couple of countries also spoke about the difficulty in tracking financial flows. And they also mentioned inequitable distribution of financing. So now, what is interesting again in these briefs is that many countries have spoken about plans or priorities related to financing. And that is what the pie chart shows us. It shows us that 29 of the countries that speak about financing have presented at least one plan or priority related to financing. And of these, the most common ones, and this is really interesting, is to explore private sector involvement as an investor in the sector, as a service provider, and in the PPP mode. There are also frequent mention of reviewing or designing finance-oriented strategies for the sector, and also about establishing and operationalizing public funds for WASH. So this is how the country commitments have discussed financing. And before I end, just a couple of interesting anecdotes, if I may, which are on the next slide. And yes, so now on these two anecdotes tell us about some of the less visible approaches of the countries. So, for example, 8 countries they say that they plan to incorporate the inequality considerations into the systems, and 14 countries, as I said, are exploring greater involvement of the private sector in WASH. So this is again, these are messages that have emerged from the country briefs. And on the next.
Okay.
Yes, on the next slide, Sitali. Yes. So, in order to get more information on the messages of these briefs, well, you have the briefs themselves that are available, obviously, but also this analysis, a top-line analysis of these 42 briefs, and which is entitled "What the Briefs Are Telling Us," and that will be made available very soon. It has been finalized. It will be made available soon. Then there is also the mention of the preparatory process of the SMM. So we wrote an article just before the SMM itself, speaking about how countries were preparing for the SMM, and there is and the country briefs occupy a certain place in that preparatory process. And then the briefs, as I said, are meant to be one element for a strong continuous engagement in the sector, and in order to leverage the momentum that was generated around the SMM. And that is all captured in a document called Beyond the SMM, which has already been put up on the SWA website. And finally, of course, for more information on specific points or in more general points, you're welcome to contact us at the SWA Secretariat. And with that, I think I shall end my monologue and hand it over back to Sitali, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Balvant. I really appreciate that detailed insight on what the country briefs tell us. There was a lot of time invested in preparing these country briefs. They were given to ministers so that ministers can arrive at the meeting more informed and more prepared to discuss with their counterparts. But the role, or rather the purpose of these materials does not end at the meeting. So we thought that this analysis would help in taking the conversation forward, and also in just highlighting that they can be used further in other processes, including the joint sector reviews, as well as the voluntary national reviews for those that are taking part in that. I'm checking in the chat to see if there are any questions, and so far I do not see any question specifically related to this. So I will open up the floor. If there's anybody who would like to make a question very quickly, please do so. And just so you know, we will then move very quickly to the presentation from Tanzania, which gives us a bit of a country-specific process and result around these commitments. So please just stay tuned as we get to Tanzania very, very shortly. But if there's any question, please do pick up the floor now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Italy. It's me again, Nicholas, private sector, Nigeria. Mine might not be a question, it might just be a comment with regard to the private sector participation in country. So from the last presentation, I heard a lot, with regards to different countries, obviously clamoring for private sector participation or PPP arrangement. So what I want to say is, for us as private in the sector, as also part of our global commitments, and also part of some country commitments that some of us made as private sector, if there is any country that is still not very clear on how they can get private sectors to participate and how they can get private sector to get involved in areas of maybe innovative financing models. Some countries are already doing that, and globally as private sector, we're also discussing around that. So it would be nice for email to be sent to me and Neil, who will be able to now assist the different countries that probably have not really had it very easy in terms of private sector participating, or countries that have, but they want obviously on the global private sector side to see how they can assist them further. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Nicholas, and really appreciate your let's get results done. That's really nice, and that's an offer to all the other constituencies from the private sector. If you're having challenges to engage with private sector in your country, SWA has a constituency, and their steering committee representatives are Nick and Neil, who are both on this call, and please do engage with them and through us as well, so that we can get as much support for you as possible. Is there any question? So, if there is no question, and if you have a question after this point, please do put it in the chat. And for those that have just joined, please again put your name in the chat so we know where you're joining from. Welcoming Nelson, who is from the African Development Bank, who worked with us for a while. Nelson, you're welcome. At this point, we will ask Dr. Massa, Dr. Khalid Massa from Tanzania, to give us a bit of a flavor from Tanzania in terms of the process that they've been through, how it has worked for them, the issues that they think might require further attention, and how the future is looking for them in Tanzania regarding the commitments and the mutual accountability mechanism. Dr. Massa, your line is open. Hello, Dr. Massa.
Hello, Stanley
Yes.
and the team. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And your line is clear now.
Okay. This is, as introduced, Khalid from Tanzania. And hello.
Hello,
That's an
Dr. Massa.
outline of my...
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. That's an outline of my presentation. I'll give you a bit of introduction. Then we'll see the mutual accountability mechanism support and the strengthen national process in Tanzania. We'll see our government commitments, participation in process, and then we shall see how the process was useful in the country. Next, please. Okay, next, that is where Tanzania is located in Africa. Next, please. That is Tanzania. Next. Okay, a bit of Tanzania there. It borders 8 countries, Tanzania, and it is estimated at around 58 million. Next, please. Okay, now let's come to the business of how the mutual accountability mechanism supported and strengthened the national process in Tanzania. Actually, since 2016, SWA discussion have been mainstreamed into the existing sector dialogue mechanism, and through multi-stakeholders platform, both for health and sector and the water sector, includes we have technical or thematic working group meeting that meet quarterly. We've also got joint government and the partners program supervision mission. This is done after every 6 months. Then we've got joint for both actually health and water sector review, and for both health and sector, they meet annually. And then we've got development partners group that meet monthly. And there is also annual general meeting of Tanzania Water and Sanitation Network that meet annually as well. And there is also a sustainable development platform of CSL forum that is discussing on SDG 6 reporting. And there are also 2 major events that also take place annually. One is about annual event of urban water and sanitation utilities. And also there is an event of annual environmental health and sanitation review meeting that also meets annually, and this started just last year. Next, please. Okay, the mutual accountability mechanism process continued, and through multi-stakeholder dialogue of 2018-19, it helped, it supported to jointly agree on the following issues. And these, among others, include to review the national water policy. The national water policy is of 2002, so we thought it is high time to review it. And then we have annual water scientific conference. This is started this year in March to help to coordinate research, policy, and the practice. There is also performance indicator on sanitation and hygiene that is helping to address the bottleneck of UWSA, charging a water, for example, charging a water tariff and spending the fund on water supply instead of sanitation. And we also, there is also annual MAGI scientific conference that started in March. this year. Next, please. Okay, now let's see the government commitments that were tabled. One, we thought of accelerating water supply and sanitation coverage so as to meet country and SDG targets. And the role of SCOs is one to monitor the approaches that accelerate water supply and sanitation coverage to make sure that the country targets are achieved. And another role in regarding this commitment is to identify and promote approaches, particularly for those who are poorly served in both rural and urban communities. Next, please. The second government commitment, as I said, is to review the National Water Policy of 2002, which is about 17 years now since it was developed. So once this is updated, is reviewed, it will help to guide the financing and clearly separating the service provision and oversight function. And in this, the role of SCOs is to participate in the process of reviewing the National Water Policy. Also, the CSO's commitment is to monitor, particularly the financing priorities, and to identify disparities that exist and be able to share the results with the government so as to improve the process. Next, please. Okay, the third and last government commitment is that by the year 2025, we want over 75% of rural population to access improved sanitation facilities. And this goes together with the elimination of open defecation. At the moment, we are talking about 55%. And the targets are set to rehabilitate sanitation facilities in 3,500 primary schools. We've got also a target of 700 secondary schools and about 1,000 health facilities, and also improving sanitation in 8 major highways in the country. And in as far as this last government commitment is concerned, the role of CSOs is one, to identify approaches that will help to improve sanitation and hygiene, particularly in the area which are poorly served and the remote. Also, the CSO's commitment is to identify strategies and approaches that will be able to help to eliminate open defecation, particularly in those areas which are purely served, especially schools, secondary schools, and also healthcare facilities. And the last, in as far as this commitment is concerned, is to facilitate social accountability monitoring mechanism within communities to make sure that to ensure the quality and sustainability of wash in healthcare facilities and schools. Next, please. Okay, now the process, the whole process was led by the government, the Ministry of Health with the Ministry of Water in collaboration with other sectors, Ministry of Education, regional administration and local governments. So these government ministries are the ones that led also the preparatory process for SMM, Sectors Ministers Meeting. We've also got a national SWA task team comprising representatives from the ministries that I mentioned before, and also we've got members from CSLs that facilitated the stakeholders dialogue on SDG number 6. Also, mutual accountability and approach for leaving no one behind. So through these stakeholders, we managed to compile together the commitment and country brief. And there is a long number of people who participated in the process. Actually, there are more than 1,000 coming from the government, development partners,
so unfortunately, we lost Dr. Massa on the line that we called him on. I will try and bring him back as soon as possible. If you could just give me a second. And Rebecca, I know you're there. Are there any other colleagues from Tanzania who might be with Dr. Massa or are conversant with the contents of the slide? Just give me a second as I bring him back. And for those that may not yet have given us their details, please do so. Please put them in the chat. And just to say that we plan for this webinar to end at 10:30. So in less than half an hour from now, that's when we plan for this webinar to end. So I'm now dialing Dr. Massa. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat as well. So Benson, I see your question in terms of functions. What's the difference between the two bodies, which you said they meet annually on water and sanitation and health? Okay, thank you. So bring that question to him. Dr. Massa, are you there?
Yes, I'm there now. I was just about to complete my presentation.
Okay. Now you can go ahead, and we have already one question for you. So when you finish, we'll let you know what the question is.
All right. Next, please.
So Dr. Massa, we're now on the slide. Okay.
All right. Okay. So in Tanzania, we found this process is very, very useful, and actually through stakeholders process, we managed to submit the glass country report that is covering situation of both water and sanitation and hygiene in both urban and rural areas. And we also submitted Ngo sanitation baseline report. And this process also helped to prepare and submit the voluntary national report to the high-level political forum. So it really helped the country to come together as stakeholders on sanitation and hygiene and to do other global initiatives. We've also developed actually the robust web monitoring that is helping to collect data from the grassroots level to the national level. Next, please. Okay, this is our National Sanitation Management Information System that is collecting data from the local grassroots level to the national level. Next, please. And this is how it looks like, and that is the web that we are using. Next, please. That is our symbol, and through and our national sanitation management information can be accessed worldwide, of course, through password. But we've also got a website for practice and training, and we've got our live server that is hosted off-site through Vodacom, but the backup is done in-house at the Ministry of Health. Next, please. Okay, and now all the countries are reporting actually the issue of sanitation throughout the country through this system, and the flow of data is from the sub-district to the district, that is paperwork, and from the district to the national, it is through the web. Yes. Asante sana.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Massa. I'm clapping here, and I'm hoping that there's also some claps somewhere else in the world. Thank you so much. This is very, very helpful. So we will pause here for questions. We already have one question from Atta Benson in Nigeria. Atta Benson, could you just pick up the floor so we can hear your voice? I have a question also for you, Dr. Massa. So after Benson, I will also ask a question. Atta Benson, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted. If you could go ahead and ask your question.
Okay.
Okay, I can't get him. So I will ask.
I saw the.
You saw the question, yes.
I saw the question.
So the question was, in terms of function, what is the difference between the two bodies which you said meet annually on water and sanitation and health?
Okay, thank you for the question. The two bodies that meet annually is that one body is led by the Minister of Health, and the other body is led by the Minister of Water. So when the health sector body meets, it calls for it is inviting all the stakeholders of health sector. Of course, water sector also invited, and this another bodies is separately invited by the water sector, and they invite their water sector stakeholders. So they are two separate bodies meet annually.
Okay, thank you so much. So there's a question also from Mr. Awe. Mr. Awe, would you like to just pick up the floor so we can also hear you? Mr. Awe, your line is unmuted now. We seem to be having difficulties with the audio. So the question he asks, which is also really interesting, has Tanzania attempted costing the national commitments to ensure adequate provisions are made? Dr. Massa, can you hear? Did you hear me?
Hello.
Yes. So the question from Mr. Awe in Nigeria is, have you costed the government commitments? Let me just read it again. Has Tanzania attempted costing the national commitments to ensure adequate provisions are made?
Okay, thank you, Awe from Nigeria. Actually, we have costed our commitments. We know how much it costs for each commitment.
Okay, so that's good. I know also that the other countries that are now pushing for, as the next step in the commitments, they are asking all the partners that have made commitments to give them an implementation plan, which is also costed. So it just doesn't end at saying this is our commitment, but it also goes further to say this is our implementation plan as well as the cost around it. The question I had for you is that in most of the commitments, if not all of them, you have the government and then you have the CSOs. Have you had discussions, and I know that you've included others in the consultation, in the process. You've had the research and academia, you've had development partners, private sector, politicians, and others, which is really good. However, the presentation shows that only CSOs have reached the stage of making commitments. Could you tell us what's happening with the other groups? Are they making commitments? Are they at a stage where they could openly tell you what those commitments are? If that's not happening, thank you.
Thank you, Sitali, for the question. We thought maybe for the sake of this presentation, maybe what is required the most is the CSO's commitment. But likewise, other stakeholders have also got their role to make sure our commitments are achieved.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes, Nick, yes, you can ask your question. And just before you do, let me already also inform Dr. Massa that there's a question from from Eswatini about the MIS, the National Sanitation MIS system that you have. The question is whether you could share the roadmap of how you got to have that system in place. And this is also very helpful. If you answer that, even the roadmap, that would be great, because we heard from Cambodia, for example, that they wanted a similar process to learn from another country. So if you could share that, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. We are happy to share the process and the roadmap of how we developed our National Sanitation Management Information System.
Great, thank you. Nicholas, your line is clear.
Yeah, so Master, my name is Nicholas from Nigeria, representing private sector. My little concern and my question. Let me start with the concern. The concern is, during your multi-stakeholders arrangement in making up these commitments, it looks like the understanding is that government, and I'm just adding to what Sitali said, the government and the CSOs are making commitments, and other stakeholders like private sector that you mentioned are helping them to make commitments, while that might not be the commitment process or demand process. The whole idea, in my understanding, from what happened in Nigeria, is that all the stakeholders that you just mentioned, the private sector, the external support agencies, the CSOs, whatever, are supposed to make commitments that will align with the government priorities, not for them to help the government or the CSOs to make commitments. That's on one side. On the other side is our interest on the private sector that assisted, in what you have done so far, in assisting those or the government to make, commitments. If you can share the names of those private sectors, so that we'll be able to now start to advise them on how actively they will be involved and the kind of roles that we
Nicholas, I can't hear you. Your line has dropped. But I think
I think I said thank you before I
oh,
muted it.
okay, all right, okay, thank you so much. So Dr. Massa, would you like to respond to that? Hello?
Hello. I didn't get Nicholas very well.
Okay, let me repeat. I said two things. Number one, during your commitment processes, you probably brought the stakeholders that you highlighted in your presentation, the private sector and other CSOs and governments. So what I was trying to say is that my understanding of multi-stakeholders commitments is that those stakeholders should make their own commitments separate, assisting the government or the CSOs to make commitments. The special interest for me is the private sector that participated. I would have loved where the private sector themselves would have been asked to make commitments that will align to the priorities of the Tanzanian Washington government or government. That is one concern that I have in terms of the understanding of how to make multi-stakeholders commitments. And I'm also adding to what Sitali said. It's not just the CSOs and the government that are supposed to make commitments in Tanzania. Why the other one is a question, or a request that you can share with myself and Neil as the private sector representative in SWA to have the list of the few private sectors that participated in assisting CSOs and the government to make their commitments so far, for us to be able to start to engage them in bringing them to SWA, in also, assisting them to know the way, what areas that they have to focus on in assisting the government of Tanzania. I don't know if that is clear now.
I think if I got Nicholas well, he is kind of emphasizing the participation of private sector and the other stakeholders as well, to make sure that they also participate in making sure the government commitments are together achieved. Actually, as I said earlier, is that we'll make sure that each and every stakeholders have got a role to play, and maybe identifying what are those roles that can be played by different stakeholders. Because the way we prepared our commitments, we did it together through stakeholders preparatory process. Maybe we will do what we are going to do is to make sure that each and everyone we kind of specifying what role is going to be played by each, including private sector participation.
Great. Thank you so much. This is really interesting, and once again, I'd like to thank you a lot, Dr. Massa and colleagues in Tanzania. 1,000 people participating in this process at various points is really, really interesting. And now we've got 10 minutes before we close, but this is also a very exciting time because we would like to hear from all of you. And if you could just pick up your phone or go to your computer and type in www.menti.com, and then you use that code that we put in the chat, 883542, to be able to participate in this very quick exercise. This exercise is meant to help us know how useful this webinar has been, but also practically to think of what steps will you be planning to take going forward how can we help in that process? So if you participate in this exercise, it will give us really good insights on how we can support you going forward, but also more importantly, what you would plan to do after this point, after hearing this presentation that we have had. So once again, use your phone or your computer and go to www.menti.com and use the code 883542. The first question we would like you to answer is, in the coming 2 months, that is you as an individual, or we as a team, for our colleagues sitting together like in Eswatini, we will take the following actions regarding the commitments and the mutual accountability mechanism. And so colleagues in Eswatini, in Liberia, in Nigeria, I'm not sure whether you're sitting all together in one place, but if you are, please think through the commitments that you have made and the mutual accountability mechanism as a process. Are there steps that you are planning to take going forward? Just type them and submit, and then we will see that coming up here. For those that said they might plan to make new commitments or to revise commitments, that is the type of action that you could take. Nicholas, from the private sector, you offered support of the private sector to other constituencies. That's the kind of information you can put here. So if people could type, and then we will get that those responses as they come in right at the platform here. Okay. Rebecca has just added the commitments were identified during a number of stakeholder meetings and processes, including the midterm review of the national. Okay, that's really interesting as well. Joint supervision mission and your specific. Okay. Okay. So Rebecca and Dr. Massa, I think what might be, when we could do this in a bilateral discussion. Some countries have commitments from the civil society. They also have commitments from private sector. They also have commitments from the developing, from the development partners. And the question that both Nicholas and I were asking was whether these other partners, in addition to civil society, whether the other partners also made additional commitments to support the priorities which have already been tabled. And we can discuss that in a bilateral at a later point. We can also share with you examples from other countries. But thank you for the input so far. So at the Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Initiative within the African Development Bank, we will work to understand and identify opportunities for support and collaboration with key stakeholders within the Africa region. Thank you so much for that. I believe that's Nelson and colleagues at the African Development Bank. So we in fact can also speak with you as we are having discussions now with AMCAO on how to align with the regional processes. So Nelson, I think it'll be good to pick up this conversation as well with Virginia. I will share the slides with countries I have oversight for to support them follow up at national level. That's good. And if you feel like you want to put your name or name of country, just so we can know in case of follow-up, that would be great. You could do that as well. And Dr. Massa and Rebecca, I note that you are welcoming our request for a bilateral, and we can definitely set that up soon and share examples from other countries as well. Monitoring implementation of government commitments. Okay. So we will move to the next. Okay, we see a need to engage further with national constituencies to get full buy-in and understanding of the SWA initiative. Okay, so I mean for this, please do get in touch with us at the Secretariat, and we can do two things. We can have a discussion with you for those that are requesting for further engagement. We can have a direct discussion with you, but we can also bring in other partners that have taken some further steps So you can also hear it from people who are working on this from the field. So Marisa, if we could move to the next question, just so we can see if we get further input. If you see a role for the Secretariat or other partners to support you as you take the process forward on the mutual accountability mechanism and the commitments, please do put in here what you feel that help should be. Let us know if you need any type of support and what that support is. We would also appreciate if you could just put your name there as well so that we can know how to reach you easily. So that's the second question, basically asking you to indicate what kind of support you need going forward on the mutual accountability mechanism. Dedo, thanks to hear that. Would you just pick up the floor, Dedo, just so we can get I would like to know, for example, when you say the bite-sized commitments around the rehabilitation of WASH facilities, you mean you like the commitments that have been taken? Yes, please.
Totally?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tanzania, for the presentation. Sometimes, I think at the beginning of the webinar, we talked about commitments being too large and sometimes, not clear. But I think I like what Tanzania came up with in terms of, okay, we know we want to rehabilitate 3,500 schools, primary schools, and 700 secondary schools, and including healthcare facilities. Because for me, this is something that's tangible, we can count, and we definitely know the impact that having rehabilitated WASH facilities in these three key institutions does for universal access to healthcare. And then secondly, the fact that the commitments are for the civil society organizations to more or less look at the software part of that. Is it working? Is it just the rehabilitation of the centers, or there's something more that needs to be done in order to reach ODF, especially at the committee level? So I just wanted to raise that as, I think it's really great that this is something that's tangible that we can all measure. And a very good place to start is a primary school.
Great. Thank you so much, Dedo. This is interesting. Your comment specifically looking at the WASH facilities, but also on how these commitments were made more watertight in terms of being specific and not too sort of convoluted. One idea that we've been talking about, and I think we have to see how we can move on this, is that perhaps it might make sense to invite in sort of ad hoc way to organize some other side conversations on commitments that just focus on WASH in healthcare facilities. The partners and countries that have made commitments on that, I think we could facilitate a conversation with them just around that. We could also facilitate a conversation with partners and governments that are very interested on the MIS process, for example. So Eswatini has asked, Tanzania has sort of shared their experience. We know Kenya, Vietnam, and Cambodia also have experiences or are sort of working on that to various degrees. So we could maybe arrange different discussions focusing on specific areas of commitments. That's just an idea to float there. But thank you so much, Dedo, for bringing that up. It sort of resuscitated this idea of having specific sort of conversations. I see here we have three types of input: providing models of such plan to refer to. I believe this is for further learning. There's the aspect of technical support, which came up again last week at the steering committee. So we're now in the process of looking at the strategy for SWA going forward. I think some of these sort of conversations need to feed into that strategy discussion. But let's see if we can link partners with other link partners together so they could share more technical experience and support around specific commitments. And then the comment from AFDB, yes, we should share with you the list of commitments, as well as the list of the 47 countries that have made commitments. So Nelson will work on that to get that to you. Facilitate the engagement at national level for CSOs and the role they need to play in SWA. Thanks, Dedo. That's another important point. It came up last week as well at the steering committee. So definitely showing that we need to keep that going. Okay, I don't think we have space for any further questions. Marisa, let me see if there's any question after this. No, I think this is it. And our time is also fast spent. So I think we will begin to bring it to a close. And I would like to thank the presenters, Virginia, Balvant, Dr. Massa. I would like to thank all the people who have given their input and all of you for participating. This has been interesting to hear the experiences of partners, but also to see the areas where we could provide further support and engagement going forward. The next webinar will be at the end of next month, and we will announce that, and we will share information and the summary of this webinar in the coming days. If you have not put your name in the chat, please make sure you do so before you sign out. And if you have colleagues that have not participated in today's webinar, but they're able to participate, we have another one at 11 p.m. tonight for New York, which will be early morning for East Africa, for East Asia, and South Asia tomorrow. So there's still an opportunity for the English group to join the next webinar, which is happening early tomorrow morning in East Asia, the Pacific, and South Asia. For now, a very big thanks, and speak to you soon. Thank you.